pretty lax in their attitudes when it comes to home security.
It is the new world that we live in.
It's a horrible feeling, a total violation.
They were crushed and trampled to death.
A new personal surveillance product is hitting the market, and it's designed to protect you.
The private sector are being targeted in a sophisticated state-based cyber attack. Here to break it down for us is Calamity security expert
Daniel Lukovitz, the CEO of Calamity Monitoring.
Thanks for having me and such a wonderful intro.
Standard time alarms. Daniel Lukovitz.
Shut down our business to about
Our security expert uses a wire code to break into this house.
I've asked him to come on the program tonight because his observations are instructive to all of us across Australia. Daniel Lukovitz wrote, much contemporary security and law enforcement focuses on terrorism.
The issues that were raised involved crowd safety. And crowd safety now has got a tremendous amount of science behind it.
He's fighting back against these online slacktivists. A lot of other companies are going to have to learn how to do the same.
But what criminals are looking for is the best ability to have a robbery and leave without getting caught. So if your property looks like there's a good chance that they're going to get detected or they're going to have a hard time getting in and there's a chance they're going to jail, they're going to go next door instead.
Whoa, someone's watching us.
My staff are watching us 24 hours a day.
This is Calamity Monitoring's headquarters. First, we need to get into the building. And it's easier said than done.
These doors weigh about 200 kilos each, and no one gets in here unless we know who they are and we want them here.
And one of the things that always upsets me is when we get a call at Calamity from someone who just got robbed saying, I need help. And what they don't realise is that crime happens all year round. And funnily enough, criminals actually go away for Christmas.
From here, the security of thousands of homes and businesses across the country is monitored 24 hours a day.
It's technology that saves lives. I call the people at my office heroes in a headset because they literally save people's lives. It's a fantastic company, it's a fantastic service. And
everyone at home is watching and listening to you and thinking, why on earth were you contracted in to clean up the mess? You've explained better than anyone I've heard in the last few weeks where the systemic failures are. Thank you very much for your time, Daniel, and I can tell you what, you'll be back on the show in a not too distant future.
Generally speaking, statistics are flat all year round, so I would be telling people their New Year's resolution should probably be look at your home security, and it's probably easier to do that than to quit smoking or hit the gym, which is the usual resolution people have.
And an easier one to achieve.
Hopefully, yes.
Absolutely. Daniel Lukovitz, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome LinkedIn Live. We're going to see a bunch of people joining the party. I've got someone really special today, and if I were to read out this man's entire resume, an hour will go very quickly before we even get a chance to talk to him. But it's my absolute pleasure to be talking to Jason Semple, who is a man who has a resume in law enforcement, military, combat that's one of the most impressive I've ever come across. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to him. History in the Australian Federal Police, tactical counter sniper, working in dignitary protection, looking after every dignitary you can imagine, including the President of the United States, and that's the good one, not the dodgy one. Tours of service overseas, a man who's looked after our nation, who's looked after our people, and who's here today looking after me by giving me the pleasure of actually having a chat with him. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jason Semple. Jason, how are you? Thanks so much for coming on air with me.
Well, that's some introduction, Daniel. Really appreciate that. Very humbled to hear that sort of dialogue, mate. I appreciate being here and the opportunity to talk, especially during the times that we're living in at the moment. So thanks again, mate.
Jason, I have to say, by the way, the short military law enforcement haircut's a really useful thing to have during a pandemic when most people haven't been allowed to go and get a haircut for the last several months. Yeah,
absolutely. Plus, when you're going as Graham, it's the surefire way to combat going grey, mate. It's just to actually limit how much of it's coming out of your head. So yeah,
so we'll fix it in Photoshop later. So tell me, where are you sitting right now, Jason?
I'm actually sitting in the Ellie Gear Gold Coast office for, we're a division of Australian Defence Apparel. So yeah, we're basically the operations hub of that division of the business. So yeah, just sitting in Queensland. We're, I suppose we're blessed comparative to, you know, various other areas around Australia where we've got a lot of freedom to move about. You know, not necessarily, obviously not out of Queensland, but yeah, definitely not complaining about living in Queensland at the moment.
No, I think what I'd say, Queensland, beautiful one day and banned to the rest of you the next, you know.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but pretty much the case at the moment, isn't it?
It is. We live, as the Chinese say, in interesting times, and that's certainly something that you and I are going to talk about. I mean, it's interesting because we've come across each other on LinkedIn in particular, you know, a number of times over the years, and sort of popped up in each other's comments feeds, and you know, liked each other's posts, or had, you know, furious arguments the way, you know, adults can do and still be friends. And you know, one thing that I thought was really fantastic was about a year ago, probably less than that now, but time flies in a pandemic, when you did a podcast with Gary Jubelin in regards to an incident early in your policing career. And I remember going, I know that guy. He likes my posts on LinkedIn. And I just thought it was wonderful. But I'd love to talk about that if we can, because one of the things that I found, you know, during the pandemic is that everybody's experiencing it in their own different and unique way. And personally, as someone who, you know, I'd like to think of myself as quite resilient. You know, I'm pretty tough. I'm probably an alpha male. You know, I've been in the security industry for a very long time. I've done, you know, all sorts of tough things. So I don't get rattled easily. And I don't know whether it's this career that's made me hard to rattle, or it was being hard to rattle that pushed me into this career. But, you know, generally speaking, you know, I found things okay. I know that, you know, 12 months ago when all this started, you know, I used to cringe when everyone would say, stay safe. And that was a greeting that, you know, military and law enforcement and police and so forth would often give each other. And I remember cringing when people would say to me, oh, stay safe, which, you know, really meant, okay, I'll sit on the couch and I'll order delivery food and watch Netflix, which was most people's sort of pandemic experience. But over time, you know, even this stuff's actually caught up with me. And so I'm realizing that there's an awful lot of people out there who are really, really struggling. And not just, you know, the obvious ones because they've lost their business due to inept governance or lockdowns, things like that, but even people who are just finally seeing things catching up with them. And I suppose one of the ways that I perhaps look at this, and, you know, I don't know if it's stoicism or just pragmatism, but that's thinking that, you know what, as bad as any of us could ever think our situation is, we still live in an amazing country, and there's people out there who are doing it far, far tougher than us. But I'm thinking of your background and your situation, and basically coming very close to losing your life. And I wonder if that sort of gives a bit of fresh perspective on dealing with bad news. But perhaps, do you want to just start by telling me what happened that night?
Yeah, well, it's a long time ago, as I was saying with Gary Jubelin on his podcast, you know, but it's funny, 20 plus years can, you know, still come across as, you know, so fresh. I think the rawness of fear, you know, from when I was actually stabbed is I can tap into that anytime. And it's still very fresh, very raw, actually, because it's such a powerful emotion. But basically, you know, that night, you know, after work, myself and Pete Forsyth and Brian Neville attended a local pub around the corner from where Pete lives. And, you know, as I was saying to Gary, you know, for the first time ever, I think I actually just drank a couple of light beers and was very, very well behaved, especially being a Novocastrian, sort of in our breeding a little bit to be, you know, enjoy a few beers, especially back in those days. But, you know, after leaving, we had work the next day, and it was probably 11:30 at night, and we'd come across, you know, someone who was trying to sell drugs around the corner from Pete's house. You know, we're law enforcement officers. Even I was still in partial uniform, just had a T-shirt over the uniform. So I was quite incredulous that someone would try and do that, you know, because you'd have to be literally blind not to have realised what I was wearing. It was very, you know, talking the old school New South Wales police blue pants and the slip-on leather, you know, police boots of the day, and, you know, I had my shirt on underneath. So yeah, I was quite sort of surprised and amused by it at first. everyone was compliant. Just got to a point where, and at this point, as obviously the offender was sort of prepping himself to, do a violent act. Not really in context with the amount of trouble he would have been in for, trying to sell us a supposed ecstasy pill, but I think in his persona, he'd been playing around with knives a lot, so and practicing the stabbing motion, according to evidence that came out in court. But I think if he hadn't come across us and had the altercation with us and stabbed myself and Pete, then most likely there was, there's a high probability it probably would have happened to some young person. Not that it's horrifying what's happened to Pete and then the ongoing effects to his family. But, if it was just me, I would be sort of a little bit grateful that it happened to me and not someone else's 17-year-old kid, because we were putting ourselves in a position where we'd made a conscious decision to sort of, enact the law and deal with this. Someone tried to sell the drugs around the corner from Pete's house. As per most people know the story, myself and Pete were stabbed multiple times. It took a little while for me to realize that I'd actually been stabbed in the context of what was happening. I thought I'd been punched a couple of times, and I reacted to that, even to a point where I didn't really throw too much violence back, which I would have been entitled to on the offender. Very short period into the actual struggle.
How many times were you actually stabbed? How many times did the knife penetrate? Do you know?
Yes, I was stabbed in the chest once, but it's stuck in my rib cage. Literally, it's stuck in the rib directly above the heart. So if it had slipped off that bone, it would have gone straight into my heart, either side of the rib. It was just one of those moments that your ribs actually did what they were, over millions of years of evolution. That's what they were there for, to protect your vital organs, right? So they did their job. And then I was stabbed in the stomach region, which went through the stomach, lacerated a artery to the stomach, and went straight through the liver and cut, like a big, obviously, and also some small intestine as well. So,
and you didn't know that you'd been stabbed. You just thought you'd been punched in the gut.
Yeah, no pain, nothing, zero pain. Just like you can feel the force, but your body's mechanisms. Oh yeah, it's funny. I always say to people, it's like my brain eventually caught up to what was going on internally from a process point in my body. In which case, then one of the the body's natural defense mechanisms, the shock, it kicks in pretty quickly and pretty resoundingly. When you look down, I pulled my shirt up, and the amount of blood I saw coming out of my, because I was bleeding from the chest as well, but not much, but a lot coming out of my stomach area, like spraying at one point. It was like I was that. Man, that's it. There's no way possible.
And that's when you knew
you can survive this. Yeah, I was just like, what? In 1 minute you're just having a beer, next minute, a few short minutes later, close to someone's home, something like that can happen. Pete obviously was just as shocked as what I was at what he was seeing. The fender was pulled away from us by Brian, and then, he nearly got stabbed as well. And it was in a foot pursuit when he sort of took off. Pete was straight onto me, where it's basically laid me on the footpath, sort of half in the footpath, half in the gutter, and said, "Oh, can you let me have a look?" So I took my hand off, and then he's like, "Well, put my hand straight back on." He goes, "Don't take your hand off that again." And I was like, and he was yelling out for assistance. Really giving it everything he had to get help for me. So people were sort of coming out of their homes at that stage and being drawn towards us. And then he just collapsed on top of me, having pretty much died on the spot after himself sustaining a single stab wound to the chest area, but the blade came out of his heart and then went back into his heart, if that makes sense, inside the same wound channel. So two stab wounds to the heart, but one stab wound to his chest.
It's amazing. I mean, even just telling the story, and I'm sure you probably have told that story many times. Does it still fill you with some sort of emotional presence, or what goes through your body at a physical perspective every time you tell that story?
I think it's one of the best things I've ever done was actually share that story when it's appropriate, in context, with people who actually care, whether it's friends, family, or from a learning environment. For if I'm talking to new police or fresh guys into the military, if I'm somewhere where you get the opportunity to, it's sharing it is like, I suppose, removing some of the poison out of your system, if that makes any sense. So I'm pretty comfortable talking about it. I can. I mean, if you put a heart rate monitor on me, I'm sure it would say otherwise to a degree. But I'm it's been over 20 years, so lots of time to ponder the what ifs. I've been through a few phases over the years. So when I had kids, it dawned on me early when they were young that if I died, so would have they. And he realised that a lot of other lives are intrinsically linked to yours. So I always used to be furious when like even I lost a few mates in the job. I was very, I suppose, unlucky where I knew a couple of guys that got killed in the line of duty, especially in New South Wales. I felt that the judiciary doesn't take murder seriously. It's like, so if you kill someone and you're not just killing them, you're killing everything they would have been as a human, plus everyone that would have come after them. So if they were going to have kids,
I mean,
just wiped out.
I'm amazed by that. I mean, let's just say that again. The judiciary doesn't take murder seriously.
Yeah. Well, in fact, they don't take, in my opinion, at the moment, they don't take crime in general serious. There is, and getting a little bit off topic, talking about that incident, that one of the biggest issues in society right now is lack of consequence, and it's that lack of consequence is driven by people who don't apply. The police are out there working their butts off every day to enforce the law, and then that's just undermined every day in the judiciary. I've got absolutely zero faith in that in our judiciary Australia wide.
Is that what led to you getting out of policing?
No, absolutely not. I love policing. I love everything to do with it. But in saying that, one thing that did get driven out of that incident was pretty much insatiable appetite to not be. I think I had it. I was saying to Gary Jubelin, prior to the event, but I just didn't want to live a life of mediocrity. So, and then it was one thing I'd said a few times, when I've been at memorials for Pete Forsyth, and say, I survived, he didn't, and it was like going, I'll do everything known to man to live my life to its utmost. But realistically, everyone should have that plan in life. You don't need to have some critical event to understand that you've got a huge amount to contribute, and don't settle for that mediocrity. Some people take comfort in it, so I get that. Not everyone's personality drives them in that direction, but for me, it's like, man, and I was saying to a guy recently who was talking about undertaking like a pretty extraneous, special forces sort of, selection program, and having a few doubts, and I was like, oh man, like literally, I've got no regrets in life. There's obviously a lot of things everyone has in their life that sort of maybe don't go to plan, but I don't regret anything in life because I really pushed the boundaries of trying to jam as much in as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And the one thing people never realize, the most valuable commodity that we all possess is time, and you do not know.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I are talking now, Daniel, and later today something could happen to either of us. I rode a motorcycle, or it could be just something inert where you just, probably not likely to die from COVID. But anyway, that's another discussion. Plus, I'm lucky. I'm all vaxxed up, so all you anti-vaxxers out there.
Yeah, we were, frontline people getting vaxxed before it was trendy.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things you sometimes hear about people who are unsuccessful at suicide is literally for people who jumped on their way to the ground, they actually realized they'd made a terrible mistake, and they suddenly realized that they have so much to live for. And in some respects, it's remarkable hearing, your zest for life and your passion to go on no matter what. And even, the transformation you went through, bulking up and working out after you went through that incident to just develop that survival mindset. But it's not every day that people confront their own mortality or get stabbed or something like that. And you wonder if people sort of need that kick in the behind to get them going. I mean, you have the sort of the type A and the type B personality, and so the type A, and you get a lot of that in law enforcement and military. And these are people who they're very competitive, and they're aggressive, and they want to drive forward, and they want to keep going and keep going. And then you've got your type B, who's a bit more laid back. And from my understanding, and by the way, this is live, so if people type in comments who are watching this, we see this in real time, so feel free to bang away on the keyboard if you agree or disagree or just want to say g'day. It's good to know who's out there. Type A and type B was identified by some cardiologists who noticed that in a medical practice, the seats where the cardio patients would sit were constantly getting worn out, because the patients who were coming in and they were fidgeting and they were squirming and they were sitting in their seats were also the ones who were having heart attacks and going and seeing the cardiologist. So, there is a balancing act. And, you've been to the mountains, so you've seen the toughest, you've seen the toughest things that people, are likely to come across in their life. It doesn't mean everything else is anticlimactic, but how do you manage to relax? How do you manage to just put your feet up and stay calm?
Probably many years of, some of it's organic, some of it's been taught. Or definitely a lot of reading over the years on mindfulness. So mindfulness is key to literally everything in terms of inner peace. So you can't, if you're not being mindful, you're not identifying aspects of emotion or things around you. You can't be grateful realistically if you're not. So that mindfulness it's quite a broad thing. You could talk on mindfulness for literally days and days. But the key takeaway points from it are just being aware. So being conscious and identifying things. And it was funny because someone said to me, even like a good example of even just really the most super level of mindfulness is like you watch people sit at a doctor's surgery, in the waiting room, just looking at their watch, just getting furious by the minute, because doctors are the one profession on earth that don't keep timings right. So if it was any other profession on earth, they would be out of business. But for some reason, doctors get away with being late every single time you go there. I don't even notice this, but you're watching people.
Jason, I have to tell you, my father, who's retired now, was a doctor.
Yep.
I think I can confidently say he's never been on time to anything in his life, and so going into my line of work, I had to teach myself how to be on time to things, which was not a habit I picked up growing up. And one of his colleagues, it's interesting that I always thought this was just my theory, but one of his colleagues said that there are only two professions in the world that actually have something called a waiting room, where customers will patiently wait and not get frustrated. And one is a doctor's surgery and the other is a brothel.
I haven't heard that one, but that makes sense, I suppose. So getting back to that mindfulness example there, basically, if you're sitting in there and you're like, it's all relative to what's going on around you. So, you can sit there and get flustered and look at your watch and get, what's this dude doing, or what's this doctor, and get angry. And you could have good reason to. You might have other things to go to, but is it changing anything? Is it helping you at all? And it's basically just slowing down and then just actually taking some time out to examine what's even in your just immediate vicinity and big, like you're safe, you're warm, everything's fine. So why are you getting so flustered? That it's not affecting your timeline, but it's just generating this real negative poison in your system because
it might be a regional thing as well. I mean, I know Sydney over the last 15, 20 years seems to have become a really angry sort of place. And I mean, I find that if you could drive to say Bondi Beach, from a distant time when you were allowed to go to the beach, and you could sit there and someone, while you were getting back in the car and just putting your seatbelt on and adjusting your towel and whatever, someone behind you would start furiously beeping the horn at you, and you're just thinking, gosh, you must be in a real rush to go to the beach and relax. Now, in combat, certainly, in sniping and also in recovery and so forth, you're taught tactical breathing. And, it's one of those funny things, you add the word tactical to anything and it's just all of a sudden cooler. But that's a series of breath patterns that can slow the heart rate, that can stop a body alarm reaction, that can, help you and so forth. If you were going to give someone, without going into a full meditation course, but if you were going to just give someone, your sort of top tip for just calming down in a hurry, what would that be?
Well, breathing would be the number one, so it's interesting you brought that up. Breathing just, it's like an internal process that you can control in terms of, in terms of how vigorously you do it. If you can notice that you're, starting to hyperventilate or you're not breathing enough, then the oxygen levels, you don't want too much coming in, you don't want a deficiency. So breathing just allows you to sort of generate that calm sort of process that you need to do. A lot of that goes by the wayside though. If truly remaining calm, a lot of it comes down to experience. Unfortunately, as a species, we're sort of, we're not preordained with exposures that some of our ancestors had outside of some of the, I suppose, the genetic reactionary, the fight and flight responses that we have actually sort of in our systems. But we have to learn by experience as we go. And it's unfortunately, it's takes people a long time sometimes to become, decent humans. They have to go through a lot of experiences to be able to. For me, I can still think back to when you're near some other guys that didn't have anywhere near their experience levels that we were lucky to have, and you're just watching, going, "Hey, man, just calm down." And then that goes for when I was in policing, and you got the offender as well, and they're just really amped up. You're going, it's funny how a calm voice sort of will allow them to sort of tap into and start to calm down as well. Where there's nothing worse than having a police officer screaming at the top of his head because he's actually anxious, and that's his, that's his activity, but he's actually driving the whole scenario.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see the cultural shift, because if we talk about a younger generation now that may be more easily rattled and maybe spooked, and those people are going into military and policing type roles, how that will manifest itself. You would have seen, I'm sure, a 1988 Caliber Press training video called "Surviving Edged Weapons."
Oh yeah,
yeah, and there's things that you just sort of remember. And that is a video, to this day, I don't know how long feet and inches are, because I'm a metric guy, but I know, 21 feet is the Tula drill, and, the sort of reactionary gap that you're going to want to keep at a minimum between you and an offender carrying a knife. And, that video, it hasn't aged well. It's actually, I paid a lot of money for it, and I've got it on a crusty VHS copy somewhere in my training library. It's now actually available on YouTube, and if people haven't seen it, I'd watch it. One thing that's funny is that there's a lot of people now who've done sort of reaction videos to Surviving Edged Weapons, and they're laughing at the terrible haircuts and the bad Canadian accents and so forth. but that was a very, very serious video that has, guided my thinking toward knives. I actually want to show you a clip from it. So this is a man called James Phillips. And if you've seen Surviving Edge Weapons, you'll remember this guy. If for nothing else than his haircut. Now, remember, this was the 80s. The video, it happens sort of toward the closing credits. So there's some music that sounds like they had a cop playing a Casio keyboard over this, some real lowbrow production stuff. But watch this, Jason, because I'd like your thoughts on whether this mindset was sort of similar to yours in terms of that survival instinct when you had that awful incident.
In my mind, I'm never going to die in no ghetto. Absolutely never. If a man turns around and punches me in the head, the fight's on. If he cuts me, the fight's on. If I'm shot, the fight is on. I'm not losing no fight to no scumbag out there in no ghetto. Period. That's it. No son of a bitch out there is going to get me. The only way he gets me is cut my head off, and I mean that. I'll fight you till I got a breath left in me. I don't think any of those animals in that street can beat me. And I've gone that way for 18 years of street service, street duty, and that's the way I'm going to keep on going. You don't lose the fight.
Is he right?
Absolutely. The mindset's like the biggest component of survivability. As corny as that, like I said, it was, it's got the music and, even the sort of brash sort of, simplistic ways delivering it. It's spot on the money, right? So, the mindset and, it's funny. I had an argument with a psychologist a long time ago who relented in the argument, said, yeah, right, I'll capitulate to you. But it was basically, we used to go for a lot of psych reviews all the time, depending on what unit I was in. It got down to, I think the most regular we got to was about 12 weeks, where every 12 weeks we're going to the psych just to make sure everyone was sort of tracking along nicely. And she basically, and I used to be armed a lot, because we're always on call. So I always had a handgun, even when I wasn't at work, right? So, but there was obviously other times he didn't. And she said, do you have a service station or anything nearby? And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I've got one literally straight across the road from my place. I'd go over there and get sneaky mint sliced biscuits for movies all the time. Don't tell anyone. And she goes, well, if you were to go in there and, someone was to come in and hold up the place, how, what would you do? How would you feel? And I was like, perfect. And she goes, like, what do you mean perfect? And she goes, every time I go over there, I think that, how will I deal with it? And she goes, like straight away, that is super, super unhealthy way to be thinking if that's what you're doing all the time. And I said, well, I'm not doing it all the time, but if I'm by myself and I'm talking to someone across the road and engaged in that conversation, and a lot of the time and it's the same as you go to a cafe, anywhere, you're positioning yourself and you're not sitting there hyper vigilant and being some crazy person, but if something happens, where am I going to go? You're not positioning your back to the door, the age old things that plague most of us guys and girls from law enforcement and military. Anyway, so she said, well, what if you're not armed? I said, that's no real drama. It just means you've got to use some other means to come out on top. So she's like, even if they were armed with a gun, would you sort of be, prone to still get involved? I said, yeah, you wouldn't be stupid. But yeah, I'll be looking for every opportunity if they're armed with a firearm to, I suppose, ruin their day. And once again, she came around, well, it seems very unhealthy that you would think that all the time. And it was like, and I said, even if you're grabbing a can of baked beans in the local 7-Eleven, it's like, whatever is at your means, right? And it excites me a little bit because it's like, this person's coming here to do that, and then you're in there and they weren't expecting that. And I used to see it when we used to do live tactical jobs where, just seeing that look of deflation on someone who thought they were this, big, mean, tough, individual. And then they've run into guys who and girls who actually are and well trained. So yeah, she
Well,
anyway.
I think
saying,
Mike Tyson said. He said everybody's got a plan till they get a punch in the face.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
So, anyway, she was like, well, that's unhealthy. And I go, well, no, it's not, because mindset is everything. You need to visualize, and you have to be careful here. You're not going to be, like I said, you don't want to get yourself into some hyper stimulus all the time, because that's obviously PTSD is driven out of that. But you also need to be, if you can't visualize something and how you go about it, when it happens, then there's a delay, because you actually, then you have to think about, well, what am I doing? Whereas if you're sort of replaying, your response, doesn't matter what it is. So when we were doing operational tasks, the same thing. It's like, okay, if this happens, we used to talk about it, plan it, but you're always thinking, what ifs, and you're doing it subconsciously a lot of the time as well. So anyway, at the end of that conversation with her, I said, listen, if there's guys working in my unit who aren't thinking that way, I actually don't want them in the unit, because it means they're just underprepared. And what are they? They're just bolting around, super complacent, where they should be sort of in a position where, that mindset and it leads into, that video you just played, where it's not only, what will I do, but it's like, there is no room to give up. And it might not be a case where the offender's done something horrendous to you and then left, and now you're laying there bleeding like I was. So then it just comes down to, what can I do for myself? You can't. And for me, it was like, I'd read a book the night before, I'd said it to Gary Jubelin, where, there was a passage in there, and I read about Mick Drury getting shot, and he's laying and he's bleeding to death. And he knew the only thing he could do, because he didn't have a surgical history, of course, and he couldn't operate on himself. So he knew the only thing he could do was to remain as calm as he could, thus allowing more time, before you bleed out, for the actual assistance to turn up and save your life. So that mindset, it's not always just about the fight with the offender, because sometimes that's over really quickly. That's about the avenues and the thought process afterwards as well.
And to those of you just joining us, you get to eat lunch and watch a fantastic chat with me, Daniel Lukovitz, and Jason Semple. Thanks for some of your comments. Keep sending those through. Those are fantastic. Jason, did you find there was a change in that mindset, or how it varied between wearing the uniform in policing and wearing the uniform in the military?
Oh, actually, I was never in the ADF, Daniel. I was embedded with them many times over the years, worked hand in hand with them on lots of operations. I was embedded with military overseas with the UAE Presidential Guard for a number of years. Yet, I've actually never worn the. In fact, the probably the reason why I haven't worn it is because I was actually plugged in to do a selection program with the commandos when I got stabbed. So that sort of diverted my course of, my sliding door moment. And once I got into the tactical world, I suppose I got to enjoy some of the aspects that, that I would have got to enjoy in defence. So I've deployed with them into Afghanistan, when I was with the Federal Police, once again with the Federal Police in the Timor, alongside them in the Philippines. So it's...
Did they embrace you as, one of theirs, or was there a, was there a boundary there? Or, I mean, did you notice a cultural difference?
Yeah, I think more from there's definitely a cultural distance, but there's difference, but there's a lot of similarities in shared ethos. So I never ever felt on the outer. Obviously, everyone's got different roles. When I was in Afghanistan, we used to laugh about it because I had quite a few mates in SASR and 2 Commando over there at the time, and I would sort of say, hey, it's amazing the government's paying me this amount of money to be here and stay in the camp nice and safe, and you guys are going out there doing all the hard work. So we used to rib each other on that all the time. But you contribute in different ways. You've got to know, you've got to check your ego at the door sometimes as well. And there's a lot of times, you go, man, I'll just do anything to be throwing on the kit and going out with them. And it was it actually was something that was very credibly talked about, back with Paul Burns when he was the commander of SASR, wanting to take guys from my unit, and we weren't going to be with the spear. That was for his troopers to be doing the war fighting. We would just we would be on task with them, and then once armed, but once a target had been sort of made safe, if you want to call it that, we would come in and help with some of the sensitive site exploitations and how to I suppose get better bang for your dollar in terms of if it was Taliban, what evidentiary stuff could be used to sort of put them away for a longer. Sometimes you could put someone away longer in Afghanistan for a drug possession, which sounds really funny, right? Than you would for a terrorism offence. So
terrorism and jihad and murdering people's cool, but drugs, that's not bueno.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, Afghanistan is not good at the moment,
no.
And in 1 week, we've seen how billions of dollars, probably trillions from the US, billions from Australia, lives. I have a distant friend who lost his life over there. You would have known people who gave everything over there, and we're just watching it falling apart. And I suppose we could talk about that forever, and it would if you weren't already miserable enjoying the pandemic, then you could talk about that and see how that cheered people up for a lunchtime chat. But I have noticed something interesting on social media lately, and particularly LinkedIn, which is where we are now. Which is that people now are starting to have conversations online that once upon a time they would have thought were unsafe or were off brand. So you'll have a sales and a marketing person or an accounting finance person who will be jumping into the comments section and talking about everything from vaccination to the pandemic to to gender issues or political issues. And it's the strangest thing, because once upon a time when I was a young person starting out in the workforce, there were 2 or sometimes 3 things that you never ever discussed at work, and those were religion, politics, and depending where you work, sport. And those were things that you just did not discuss at the office. And yet, something strange happened a few years ago. All of a sudden, and I think this really sort of coincided with woke politics. You could discuss certain safe woke political things online, and I called it cheap bravery, because you'd get CEOs of large organizations that would post things online saying, our company condemns racism. And I'm just thinking, well, I mean, who doesn't?
So does everyone.
What reasonable person anywhere doesn't condemn racism? So, why do you say it? It's just, it just made no sense to me. But the problem was that, okay, well, that's fine if we've now sort of changed the rules and, it's okay to discuss politics in the workplace or perhaps online, but only certain politics. And I think, that's a problem. And I think Afghanistan's a very interesting test, because if we look at what's been happening on, say, LinkedIn, and so a few months ago we had the Christian Porter matter, and this was one of those sort of modern phenomena where things, rather than getting tried in a court of law, get tried in the court of public opinion, even though nobody actually knows any of the facts, but everyone seems to have an opinion on it. And it's a bit, a bit like sort of gun laws or the Middle East. Like, very few people actually know anything, but everyone's an expert. So the people who are an expert on that, who were, formerly experts on pandemic, and before that were experts on bushfire, and everyone's sort of throwing in their 2 cents worth. But not every side of the argument gets aired. And I think that's actually dangerous, because if only one side of an argument gets all of the airtime, I think that prevents people from actually sort of considering other views, and, you know, learning about, you know, other perspectives, which I think sort of limits our ability to engage in critical thinking. And I think it actually makes for really bad decision making. And it's probably a lot more divisive than everybody or nobody saying what they really believe.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you talk about what you just said there, you know, relative to LinkedIn, and it's actually, you know, linked to business too, because you can't, you know, if businesses were, you know, I suppose ignoring some aspects and acknowledging others, then there would be some significant outcomes for those businesses over, you know, if they chose to ignore something, for instance. Or, and I'm burying my head in the sand on that issue, you know, so, you know, just from a pure business, you know, that sort of ethos translates over, right? But you're right. And I saw a funny meme, I think I sent it to you actually, you know, where pretty much it was, I've now transcended my expertise in, you know, the coronavirus, and I'm now an expert on Afghanistan, you know, so, you know, because everyone's sort of jumping from one thing to the next, and this is bullshit, and this is crazy, and, you know, the government's done nothing, and it's like going, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. You know, when you talk about critical thinking, I think that whereas it should be critical thinking, you know, and everything positive that goes with critical thinking, what we're seeing now is thinking that's critical, you know, so they're being just critical of everything. It's like there's obviously a huge divide, but people...
Well, everyone's a knocker, you know.
Yeah, it's just like, and they're just looking for a chink in a conversation. They're looking for an attack point where it's just like, where's that really positive collaboration that should be floating around this planet, instead of, you know, you just take an opposing view for the sake of it, or what would that person know, or, you know, even if there's something that someone says, oh, yeah, you know what, I actually agree with a bit of it and not the other bit, but I'm not going to just dump a truckload of bricks on them because I can, you know. And I think like social media platforms is like this. It's pretty much the same analogy. If you're driving in your car and you give someone the finger, you know, it's like, yeah, I always say to all my kids, you know, and I've said it to my wife as well, you know, like just, you know, your reaction and the behavior in the vehicle needs to mirror exactly what your reaction and behavior would be if you're standing 30 centimeters away from that individual, because that's where it might end up. And the keyboard's no different, you know. It's just people, I think people just get this, I don't know, this overwhelming sense of enjoyment out of prodding people. But if you were actually sitting around a table, there is absolutely no way they would continue with that dialogue or deliver it in the manner in which they do. And I think,
I mean, the other thing, and this is something that, you know, that people don't realize in the absence of emojis and the smiley faces which predated them, is, you know, non-verbal communication happens face to face. So if I just go, Jason, you're a bloody idiot, right? You know, you'll grin. But if we're online, and especially if we don't know each other, and I just go, well, you're a bloody idiot. You know, your options are either A, call me every name under the sun, quite genuinely, B, you know, get terribly upset that I've just called you an idiot, or C, and, you know, this is the worst one, you block me, right? Now, all three of those options were wrong, because if we were just sitting around having, you know, drinks at a bar and calling each other idiots and whatever, we'd probably reach a consensus view, you know, on a number of things. And I mean, coming back to sort of businesses discussion and so forth, the strange thing is that businesses now are almost expected to not only have views, but to enunciate those views on every sort of political, you know, hot issue you can imagine, whether it's, you know, it's gender issues, or it's diversity issues, or it's race issues. But the one thing that they never, ever want to comment about is things that directly relate to business. So, you know, I mean, in an Australian perspective, for example, you know, you'll have businesses that will talk about, you know, whatever the big sort of political talking point is coming straight out of the US, but they won't talk about labor laws or industrial relations or wages or anything. So, for example, businesses now, through the pandemic, I've been very, very disappointed that, every business seems to have a view on vaccination and seem to have, should it be compulsory? Should there be vaccination passports? Should there be lockdowns? Should there be handouts? No one's talking about how this country became so reliant on Chinese manufacturing that we couldn't even make basic PPE for ourselves, cloth face masks, early on in the pandemic. And so we are, in my opinion, sitting in something of a fool's paradise, because we are going to come out of the other side of this and, pretend like nothing's happened. And what have we learned? We haven't actually learned anything, because people are afraid to sort of have this discussion. I mean, if you get on LinkedIn now and you start talking about China, you risk getting censored, you risk getting banned, you risk being accused of racism. Now, if you talk about America, that's fine. You can say whatever you want about America. You can say anything you want about American literature, but you couldn't say the same thing about other countries. But I don't know if that's even correct, or if people just sort of, they have prior restraint and they stop themselves and they sort of mute themselves from having a voice. I mean, I don't think I'm particularly outspoken, but I know people sort of tell me that I'm saying things online that they wish they could say. And I say to them, well, what do you mean you wish you could say it? Why don't you just say it? There's a comment box right there. And by the way, people are allowed to type in comments to this conversation as well. You're not going to, there's no pain. You're not going to get out. I mean, okay, yeah, sure. Sometimes you get banned from LinkedIn for a few weeks, but who hasn't had that?
Yeah, exactly. I get the same thing, especially from, whether it was, people from law enforcement, especially, or even military, where it's kind of, oh, mate, appreciate the support with those comments, but they're reticent to sort of, I suppose, even like them, that they'll send a personal message going, oh man, that's awesome. And I suppose, there's a bit of a, you've got to be sensible. So I think that's how communication should be anyway. There should be measured. So there shouldn't be anything that goes on any platform that is is censored. You can censor it because it as long as it's measured and it's got some the key aspects of that critical thinking, including the ability to take on board a criticism where, some might come and go, well, actually, you might want to think about this angle. It's really important, right? The minute you start killing off critical thinking, like business is dead in the water without it. But realistically, so is society. Critical thinking and the ability to challenge, respectfully challenge a view and get the dialogue going in a respectful manner.
I think that respectful aspect of it is very good, because I mean, as I've said to some people online, we can fight to the death over a topic and we can still be friends. And I mean, I've got friends whose politics are probably polar opposite of mine, and we're still friends. Like, it's okay. We're adults. We can disagree and still get along.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing. I'm not a big fan of anyone that's all the way to the right or all the way to the left, and there's, you should be somewhere in the middle and floating between, have the ability to float, center left, center right, because I think that's the sweet spot where people's critical thinking and, that ability to, take on board criticism as well. They're all positive aspects of life.
Tribal politics is just an absolute disaster for a number of reasons. I mean, the first one is, like when the Victorian hotel quarantine disaster happened, I was hugely critical of the Andrews Labor government in Victoria. I thought what happened there was completely predictable. It was preventable. It was a stuff up. It cost at least 800 lives, and it destroyed an economy, and it's going to cost more lives. However, I've also been critical of, the New South Wales Liberal government and, the federal Liberal government as well. So I don't think anybody could fairly accuse me of being sort of, rusted onto a particular party the way people might get rusted onto a football team that hasn't won a premiership in 30 years. But I don't see a lot of that online. And I mean, probably one of the most well-known and oldest military strategies is divide and conquer. And if you were, a hostile nation or an enemy state that was, looking to defeat a Western nation, well, the first half of that, the divide, has already happened, and that only leads that only leaves the second part, which is the conquering. So I wonder, are we too far down this path, and can we turn back? I mean, even just while we've been having this conversation, I've been suggesting people, pop in a comment in the LinkedIn feed because we can see that. I just got a text message from a good mate, who is in law enforcement, who's written, "This is effing brilliant, but I'm not putting my name anywhere near it. Keep it up, fellas." Now, I'm going to get stuck into him later because I don't think it's going to be a career killer for that person to, click like on something like this, because I don't think, you're going to have lose. I mean, we just had a comment come in from someone. There's plenty of data, scientific articles, and people being censored and cancelled. It's nothing to do with how it was presented, such as the lab leak theories, which are now widely accepted and circulated. And thank you for the anonymous coward that put that through. Your name didn't come up, but it's a good point. I mean, the gap between conspiracy theory and Senate inquiry now is down to a matter of months. Things that people said once, which would get you branded as a lunatic, all of a sudden people start realizing that, hey, maybe there's some sense in that. And if we don't have those conversations, whether it's about scientific issues or political issues, you don't get to canvas. And so when I hear things like the science is settled, I just think, oh gosh, this is completely unscientific. And people are taking that political approach, and the problem is it gets weaponized. So rather than two people being able to argue and disagree on things and maybe agree to disagree or find consensus or change each other's minds, people now will decide that, well, that other person's view is not only wrong, it's so unacceptable that they must not be heard from, they must be deplatformed, they must be blocked. I mean, I'm almost getting to the point where I have a lot more respect for the opinions of people who've been banned from social media at least once, because it means that they're not simply, going along with, the orthodoxy and playing it safe. And look, quite frankly, because we're on LinkedIn, let's talk about it. If all your LinkedIn feed was endless people saying how honored and humbled they were to receive yet another certificate at work, or issuing, great security advice about, don't forget to lock your house before you go away on holidays, it would become really tediously boring. I mean, I'm putting posts now that are getting literally tens of thousands of views about things that don't really directly relate to my company, but obviously the success of this nation and the safety of this nation is something I care very deeply about, because if our national security is in jeopardy, well, so is my family, so is my so is my business. So I don't see why you can't sort of have those conversations. And I just think it's funny when you see all these young people on videos talking about be your authentic self and your personal brand and so forth, and they're so completely inauthentic because they don't say things in public that they believe in private, and yet they expect people to think they know that. But at the same time, I don't think there's any downside. I've not had anybody ring up my business and, threaten to cancel because of something, one of our staff said online. I don't know why people restrain themselves, because they're that scared of it. Have you come across any of that? I mean, people congratulate you for saying things that they wanted to say. Have you ever seen any downside?
Not, maybe just you get the occasional, like I suppose someone that's in there to sort of, they're just trolling, I suppose, and just trying to say something they know will rile someone up. So they're the easiest ones to ignore, because, there's one thing, once again, is something I teach my kids, and it should be sort of synonymous with everyone in their daily lives. But the one thing you always have control over is your emotions. So allowing someone else to sort of hijack your emotions and elicit a response is like a bit counterintuitive to who I would like to be as a human. I'm noting that time's of the essence now with our this podcast. It's one thing I would suggest, I'd like to see is just people tread gently. I've come from a history, in my operational career, there was times where we were very, there was a lot of violence used. It was necessary. There was more cases where guys showed massive restraint. They could have used violence, and they didn't. But just tread gently with your basic footprint in life. Don't ram your ideas down someone else's. Listen. Try to access that critical thinking. Go look it up if you need to understand what critical thinking truly is and how it comes about. It's not critical, which is where everyone's at the moment. Just tread gently, I suppose just there's a severe lack of respect in the society at the moment. So I'd like to see some of that come back. And unfortunately, we've got like people leading the country at times that are not showing that respect and not treading gently. And, if you saw once again, I almost said, I won't say who it was because someone will get offended, but I was watching the Western Australian Premier yesterday, and the way he dived, his response to New South Wales and what they're going through and the government there. And, it was just disgraceful from a leadership perspective on how you would talk to another leader and how you would accuse another state of just letting down the country. It's like, you're kidding, right? Like, no one's gone through this before. And, New South Wales has done a fantastic job up until, the Delta variant, and they tried to stay open as long as they could. It's like, everyone's just had enough of people being negative, and he is not.
Well, I mean, a few months ago, or certainly a year ago, you would struggle to name the premier of any other state except the one you lived in, and yet here we are.
Yeah, so they're not setting a good example, right? And the mood is also dictated by that example. That our leaders should be setting the highest levels of behaviour, because the mood that comes off and swings off it. And then, the massive, it's just, it's diabolical, actually. The one people we need to be setting the best example are coming out with some of this dialogue and rhetoric that is just, just horrifying. And just, why would you talk like that? Why would you say that? That's not the case. It's just this political. And there's people struggling, as we all know.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's
I
find that disappointing.
People who were on the internet in the 90s, as I was, will remember that originally the term trolling actually meant something completely different. And a troll was a person who would ask a question completely deadpan with a view to basically drawing out a fight in the comments. Yep. So, I'm sort of chuckling now because I'm thinking back to some of the great ones, but, people would go into a Mac user forum or something, and people would go, I've had enough of using Mac and I'm thinking of Windows, which Windows PC should I get? And suddenly all of the fanboys would just pile on, and they were like these sort of bomb chuckers. And I mean, there was actually an art to it. And the art of it was not getting caught for being a troll. And then, it was sport, really. But then that sort of changed, and trolling now is this sort of all-purpose term for comments I don't like. And so, you say something I don't like because I don't agree with you or whatever. So, you're a troll and you must be silenced and you must be banned. I think we need more of it, except you're right. People also need to calm down. And so, I think, look, if you're on the street and you've had a few and some guy, does the old, what are you looking at? And, you might do a bit of chest beating right back. But at some point, you've sort of got a decision, right? Do we now start belting each other and everyone's going to hospital or jail? Or do I just, call it a night and go back with my mates. The thing is, online, these battles seem to be to the death. And I think people actually need to realize that there are so many idiots on the internet that if you spent your entire time fighting idiots on the internet, you'd never actually get to go outside. You'd never get to play with your family. You'd never get to have relationships. So, you know, I'm not one to shy away from sort of stupidity on the internet, but I think it is also important that people, you know, do catch a breath and realize that, you know, you've probably got more in common with people, you know, than you might think.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Most people share the common values. And then obviously once you get, you know, once you sort of expand those values into some of the more intricacies in living, then you can have disagreements on things. But once again, that's fine. You just got to be, you know, accept that and like be, you know, look after everyone's interests. You know, you get nothing out of warfare, really. You know, except maybe getting your heart rate up and feeling angst and, you know, anger is pretty much one of the most emotionally draining sort of, you know, personal emotions to waste your energy on. You know what I mean? It's like fear. Fear is, unless you're using fear to your advantage, and you know, the fear doesn't exist anywhere else except in your mind. You know, and if you listen to some of the stuff Tony Blauer talks about, you know, with all his 40 plus years of combative training experience as a coach, you know, that everything he talks about is fear and countering that sort of stuff. So yeah, anyway.
Well, when a warrior says you get nothing out of warfare, I think that's something that keyboard warriors need to pay good attention to. Samps, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting. Some great comments from people coming in, and people will be able to watch this on playback, and you know, they'll be sorry they missed it live. But absolutely wonderful talking to you. Take care of yourself up there, and look forward to having a beer in person one day when we're allowed off the couch.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, and one last thing, Daniel, like you know, there's a lot of people out there watching, and I've seen a lot of commentary the last few days on, you know, Victoria Police, New South Wales Police, draconian sort of outcomes there. It's just once again, just people take a deep breath and then be mindful of the fact that you've got super frustrated, you know, community out there due to COVID, and police are at the coalface of that they're the punching bags as always.
Yeah,
they're also suffering the same things inside this COVID, you know, washing machine that we're all stuck in on reverse cycle, whatever. So, you know, the fact that they're getting treated the way they are, you know, I think people need to really take a step back and just start looking after each other, and, you know, and don't take it out on our police.
No, I don't think anyone should be taking anything out on the cops. The cop, you know, the risk of using the Nuremberg defense, the police are following the orders, and it's the people above them who are getting paid a lot better than them. You know, that are ones that are more deserving of the criticism. And I think you know, full respect to police, and you know, absolute full respect to people who are doing it incredibly tough at the moment at the hands of policy from people who perhaps aren't doing that tough. You know, we live in a really difficult time, but it's been great to talk to you, to discuss, you know, how you manage to stay calm under circumstances that, you know, most people nearly all of us will hopefully never go through in our lives, and to know that, you know, things do get better, things do become easier. You've just got to be true to yourself. You've got to practice mindfulness. You have to be kind to yourself, and you have to be kind to others. Jace, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, mate. Good to see you. Take care. Hey, stay safe.